And welcome to Catholics Coast to Coast, where we just get to hang out on the weekends and anytime throughout the week at Podcast Central. Easy to find at EWTN.com/podcast. Over 100 different shows that vary in topics that help deepen our walk with God and bring us closer together. As we, of course, get to hang out, we like to dive right into our conversations, knowing that when we're on the journey, we're going to find out more of how we can be in community together. So, the On the Journey podcast, checking in with former Baptist pastor Ken Hensley, who shares 7 key realizations that helped him understand that the Reformation doctrine of salvation by faith alone wasn't actually supported by the testimony of the Scriptures. So we'll dive into those key realizations with On the Journey today on this week's Catholics Coast to Coast.
Hello and welcome to another wrinkle-resistant episode of On the Journey with Matt and Ken and Kenny. I'm Matt Swaim, Director of Outreach here at the Coming Home Network, along with my colleagues Ken Hensley and Kenny Burchard. They were both pastors in the Protestant world. For the purposes of this series, Ken was a Baptist pastor steeped in the tradition of Reformed theology, and we've been going through it in a very long series that we're really going to try and tie together really well today, I hope. But you can find previous episodes in this series by going to chnetwork.org. You can find something like 1,700 conversion stories there as well of people who come from other backgrounds and became Catholic. You can also join our online community. We have multiple online weekly Zoom meetings and a active online forum where you can interact. Community.chnetwork.org. And of course, this is all made possible through our generous partners in mission. You can join them and help support our work at chnetwork.org/compass. Ken Hensley, are you ready to just,
Matt,
tie it all together like a rug ties a room together?
Are you complaining about the length of this series so far?
No. It takes this long to really adequately explain Reformed theology.
Well, I haven't explained all of Reformed theology. We're just talking about sola fide right now, but
it takes this long to explain one small aspect of Reformed theology.
Well, I like the fact that you said wrinkle resistant, because the argument I've been making is without wrinkle. It's without blemish. No. Oh man, I'm joking. And anyway, tell me when you want me to speak.
Well, some of you have watched previous episodes of this and seen how, one aspect at a time, we've broken one thing down. And I really have been looking forward to this episode because we're going to have a chance to hear all these arguments kind of together that you may have heard one piece at a time. So, Ken, let us know how this is going to look today.
All right. Well, I'll just, show is better than tell, right? So let's just begin. Let's just walk through it. Okay. Yeah. In this series, the show is On the Journey, so it's about our stories. And I have been explaining how I came to abandon the Reformation doctrine of justification by faith alone. And you two gentlemen have been listening and been interacting because your background was a little bit different. It's been very good interaction that we've had. Okay, of course, this that is justification by faith alone. This was the central doctrinal issue of the Protestant Reformation. We all know this. Luther spoke of justification by faith alone as, quote, the article upon which the church stands or falls, and the individual Christian. Luther insisted that no one could be saved who did not accept his doctrine on this matter. Calvin referred to justification by faith alone as the hinge upon which the door of all true religion swings. And to this very day, many Protestants, have a hard time believing that anyone could be a true Christian and could truly be saved who does not view justification by faith alone as essentially synonymous with the gospel, to where anything else is heresy. Okay, all this to say that for me as a Baptist pastor, to come to the conclusion that this doctrine is unbiblical and that it's unhistorical was quite a step. And it was a key step in my own conversion to the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. In our next episode, the plan is to describe as best we can the essentials of how Catholics view the gospel. But today, what I want to do is I want to summarize the intellectual steps. That is, I want to summarize the process of thought that led me personally away from the Reformation doctrine of justification by the imputed righteousness of Christ received by faith alone, the doctrine of sola fide. And this is just going to follow the episodes that we've done, just sort of summarizing the various steps. So I'm going to tell the whole story in one episode here and hope that we can knock it off in an appropriate amount of time. Okay, step one. And you can all go back and you can watch all the episodes if you want to hear these filled out in detail. Step one, it began, you guys, for me, the day that my New Testament professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, Dr. Daniel Fuller, in fact was his name, pointed out to the class that in the Old Testament stories of men and women and their relationships with God, both faith and obedience were always required of those who would receive his blessing. And that this was never a problem. Okay. Now you might be asking, why does this seem important? Why was this important? Here's why. As an evangelical, I had been taught that obedience must never be thought of as a requirement or a condition for receiving God's blessing. Obedience should follow in the Christian's life in response to God's blessing, but if we conceive of obedience as a condition, then God's blessing instantly becomes something we have earned, something in which we could boast. Then we have stolen all the glory from God, etc., etc. Now, this line of thinking, I know you guys have heard it before, even if you didn't live with it, but this line of thought was at the very heart of how I had learned to think about my relationship with God. After all, didn't St. Paul say in Ephesians 2:8 and 9, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not because of works, lest any man should boast"? And didn't St. Paul say in Romans 11:6, "But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works, otherwise grace would no longer be grace"? And yet here was my professor, a Protestant professor at a Protestant seminary, pointing out that throughout the Old Testament, both faith and obedience were always required to receive the blessing. And never does this seem to be a problem. Never is this issue of, well, then we would have earned it, or then it's, then grace is dead and all that. Noah had to trust God, there's faith, and build the ark, there's obedience, in order to be saved through the flood. And yet there's not a hint in the story or anywhere in the Old Testament that because of this, we should think that Noah is now spending all eternity in the presence of God, boasting about how he saved himself and the human race. Abraham is presented in the New Testament as the very father of faith, and yet he had to trust God and leave Ur of the Chaldees in order to receive God's blessing. In fact, when God a bit later reveals himself to Isaac after the death of Abraham and explains to Isaac why he is going to keep his covenant to bless his descendants and make them like the stars of heaven, notice the focus. I'm quoting now from Genesis chapter 26. "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and will bless you, because Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Here Abraham's obedience is given as the very reason that God is going to keep his covenant, if you just read what it says. And again, not a hint that this somehow destroys the graciousness of the gift, or means that God did not receive all the glory, or that Abraham earned, the blessing. Not a hint of this, not a hint. So, men, this was step one for me. I'm relating this in terms of steps. I began to think at this point that there must be something wrong with how I had been taught to think about the whole issue of faith and obedience and how the two relate to one another, and how the requirement of obedience cannot be allowed into the equation without turning the gospel into a damning system of works. That was step one for me. And so I'm eager to hear whatever you two have to say about that.
just to reinforce an analogy that I believe you brought up in that episode, say, for instance, if you had a back issue and you went to the chiropractor and later you came back and the chiropractor's given you a regimen to follow and you followed it and your back gets better, you would not go around saying, I healed myself. You would be saying, you got to go see this guy.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
a miracle worker,
Yeah.
right? So you would not take credit for the small participation that you did, which is just, following what the doctor had told you to do. Again, this is all covered in a whole episode where we get into this in great detail.
Is this how you viewed obedience and faith when you were Methodist?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How about you, Kenny?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it always seemed strange to me to say that if you were obeying God and you thought that your obedience was somehow connected to your salvation, that you somehow could boast about it. Just on a relational level, if my son obeys me, he can't, it's not a cause for boasting. It just means he's rightly oriented to me. He's doing what he ought. He's doing what he ought to do because he's my son, and I've given him a good command, if you will. He's not earning anything. Yeah. I didn't think of it as earning.
I had that line of thought, though, so pounded into my brain. I had heard multiple pastors say things like, look, if you add to faith alone even 1% of obedience or anything you have to do, the whole house of cards collapses. The whole thing is destroyed. So This is the worldview I was operating in when my professor stood up and said those astounding words that day. He just said, hey, every story in the Old Testament, people have to trust and obey, and never does there appear to be a problem. Okay, let me go to step 2. Let me go to step 2 then. Step 2 followed from this. It was coming to understand that this Old Testament pattern that I could see everywhere, that is faith leading to obedience, resulting in God's blessing, that this pattern continues right on through from Matthew to Revelation. In other words, right on through the New Testament. And again, it continues without a hint of concern that this somehow compromises grace. Now, many Protestants have it in their minds, not all. Now that I've gotten to know you guys better, I never say all. Okay, many Protestants, though, have it in their minds that in the Old Testament, God's people were living under something called law. And to receive God's blessing, they had to actually do what God said. They had to obey God. But in the New Testament, all this is reversed. Now God's people live under what we call grace. And what this means is that you do not have to be obedient to God in order to receive his blessing. His blessing comes by faith alone. Okay, except that when we read the Gospels, I mean, any 5-year-old, better make it 8-year-old, any 8-year-old reading the Gospels would hear Jesus saying things such as, if anyone would be my disciple, he must take up his cross and follow me, Matthew 16:24. Or, if you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, John 15:10. Or, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven, Matthew 7:21. We hear these sorts of statements everywhere in the Gospels, and never do we hear Jesus say, but of course, I don't really mean this. And it's the same with the New Testament epistles, including St. Paul's epistles. In Romans 2, verses 6 and 7, Paul says, for he, that is God, will render to every man according to his works. To those who by patience in doing good seek for glory and honor and immortality, he will give eternal life. There's the gospel. Galatians 6, 7 through 9. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And how do we do that? Quote, let us not grow weary in doing good. Obedience. For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. So there were the Gospels. There were all these sorts of statements in the epistles, you guys. And then, of course, there was Hebrews chapter 11. Here, the inspired author of Hebrews, he speaks of Abel and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Samuel and on and on and on. A number of Old Testament saints he lists out, all of whom trusted God and did what God commanded in order to receive the promises. He says that flat out. And he presents these as examples for us to emulate. In other words, he's saying to New Testament Christians who are reading his book, Jewish Christians, he's saying, I want you to take these Old Testament men and women as your models so that you too can live the life of faith and obedience, loving God, clinging to him, obeying his commandments, and receive the promises just like they did. In other words, he wants his readers to emulate them. And I remember the thought came to my mind. We talked about this in the episode that we did. I remember the thought came to my mind that as a Protestant, okay, given the fact that God's people in the Old Testament supposedly were living under a system in which you have to obey God in order to receive his blessing, and we live under a system now, grace, in which we don't. I was thinking, the thought came to me, why didn't the author of Hebrews say something like this? Listen, there were some men and women in the Old Testament who lived under a damning system of works in which they had to obey God in order to be blessed by God. They actually had to obey God. Make sure to keep these examples in mind of how God does not want you and I to relate to him now that we live under grace. Okay, all this is point 2, or step 2 for me. All this to say that as I read the New Testament men, in the light of what I'd come to see in the Old Testament, it just became clear to me that with respect to faith and obedience, there was continuity between the two. It wasn't true that in the Old Testament you have to obey to receive, and in the New Testament you don't. There was continuity, and never is this presented in the Old Testament or the New as a problem. Any comment, men, on this one?
Just the quick comment that when Jesus invites people into his fellowship, he does not say, believe in me. He does not walk up to the different apostles and say, do you believe that I am the Messiah? I mean, that comes up in the conversation, but usually he says something like, follow me, right? It is sort of built, it's baked into the cake that those who are going to be the first representatives of Christianity are going to emulate a daily following of Jesus as part of their deal. There's going to be a daily obedience. As a matter of fact, there's just over and over situation after situation where Jesus tells them to do stuff, right? And this is God in the flesh. So it's kind of all right there in the New Testament.
Yeah, and I would say there too, the mistake I think that's being made, and a lot of us have to kind of untangle from it, is the conflating of works of the law with obedience to God. Not that doing the works of the law isn't part of obedience in the Old Covenant, but it's not everything. It's part of what had to be done by the people of God. But to dislocate obedience, or to say that works of the law means obedience to God in every case, that's where a big mistake is being made. Because, as we've said before in other episodes, you can't fulfill the Great Commission if you don't call people to obey God, to obey Christ, because Jesus says teaching them to obey, teaching them to observe. And so there's no attempt, to dislocate obedience from what it means to be a Christian. And to your point, Ken, Jesus doesn't say in the Great Commission that people, quote, just will obey or will just obey once they have real faith. In other words, it's not automatic. It's something that has to be commanded, which makes sense because once you get into the New Testament, as we've seen, there's all these commands to obey, which you don't have to tell people to do that if it'll just happen. It's part of what we're responsible, what we're responsible for as Christians.
Yeah, I wonder if we were to read through the New Testament, how many commandments to obey actually exist. And I mean, in Paul's letters, I wonder how many there are. But there are so many. Okay, but what you mentioned about the works of the law, this is great because this is exactly where we're going in steps 3 and 4. Okay, so step 1 was just seeing in the Old Testament, faith and obedience both required. Doesn't seem to be a problem like I was taught. And then guess what? In the New Testament, the same thing. faith and obedience required everywhere. Doesn't seem to be a problem. But then the question does come up, okay, what about everything that Paul said then about how we are justified by faith in Christ and not by works, or not by works of the law? How was I going to fit that into this line of thought that was beginning to develop in my mind? And this brings us to steps 3 and 4, because step 3 was this: coming to understand that in the Bible, and I'm just going to state it now, but then we'll flesh it out, was coming to understand that in the Bible, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, there seem to be two kinds of works, or two kinds of obedience. One that is required by God, then go and teach them to obey all that I've commanded you. One kind of obedience, one kind of works that is required by God in order to receive his blessing, and one kind that is condemned, one kind that is rejected. There must be two kinds of obedience. In other words, not all obedience is the same. And I would say two kinds of obedience for two kinds of people. Two kinds of obedience for two sorts of people. For instance, the first kind. Throughout the history of God's people in the Old Testament, there were always those that we can find who were like Noah and like Abraham and like all the saints listed in Hebrews chapter 11. They lived out the kind of obedience that is required by God to receive God's blessing. This kind of obedience is never set in opposition to faith in the Bible. We're going to come back to that. This kind of obedience is never set as being somehow contrary to faith. In fact, it is an obedience that flows from faith. It's an obedience that naturally flows from faith and is spoken of as virtually interchangeable with faith, as we saw in Genesis 26 regarding Abraham. And well, Abraham believed God, and so he left. It's interchangeable. He believed God, and therefore he left. Noah believed God, and therefore he got out his hammer, and then he's got out the boards, and he began to work. They're interchangeable, faith and obedience. Okay, this is the kind of obedience that God requires of us. Now, my professor, the same professor, he used the analogy of a patient and a doctor that Matt began to mention a little while back to flesh this out. Okay, imagine that Matt Swaim contracts a very rare and very deadly disease. So Matt's surfing the internet trying to figure out what to do. And he finds that there is one doctor in the entire world who knows how to handle this disease. So he calls, he sets up an appointment. Matt goes in, doctor examines him. He says, yep, you got it. I want you to go home. I've mixed up this potion for you. Matt, you're going to drink the potion 3 times a day. I want you to take this pill in the morning, that pill in the evening. I want you to do some other stuff. You're going to pull out a bugle and blast it for 5 minutes in the morning and do it again in the evening, whatever. You're going to eat nothing but chicken. I don't know. It doesn't matter for the analogy. Okay, so Matt goes home and he does exactly what the doctor says, and he's completely cured. In other words, Matt's obedience in this case is the obedience of faith. It's the obedience of one who trusts in the doctor, and therefore he does what the doctor says. And when Matt gets well, he doesn't start walking around, Washington, D.C. with his thumbs tucked under his, armpits and bragging, I got myself well. I'm so brilliant. All the glory redounds to me for what I've done. It's not natural. Matt walks around instead saying, if anyone on earth ever contracts this rare disease, you've got to go here. You've got to go to this doctor. Okay? That's the analogy that my professor used to describe this good kind. That is the kind of obedience that is required by God. It's an obedience of faith. It's the kind of obedience that a patient renders to his doctor. Okay, but there's another kind of obedience, which he referred to as the obedience of works, and another kind of people. Okay, so think about the good people, set those aside. Now there's another kind. Throughout the history of God's people in the Old Testament, we find these as well. There were always those who were not like Noah and Abraham. Instead, they seemed to be very obedient in some ways, and yet their obedience was a stench in God's nostrils. It was something rejected by God. And we find examples of this in a passage like Isaiah chapter 1, where God says to his people, I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of beasts. And you're wondering, what? God commanded these things. Bring no more vain offerings. Your incense is an abomination to me. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. We can see the same thing in our Lord's condemnation of the Jewish leadership in Matthew 23, where Jesus, well, he said a lot of things, but among them, quote, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. You blind guides, straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel." So think with me a little bit. These Jewish leaders were also obedient, like Noah was and Abraham. In a way, they were obedient. I mean, they were careful to perform certain works that God had commanded of them. And yet somehow their obedience was the opposite of obedience in God's mind. Somehow their obedience wasn't this humble obedience that a patient would render to his doctor, doing everything the doctor says in order to get well, an obedience that glorifies the doctor and not the patient. Instead, it was more like the prideful obedience of someone who almost thinks he's doing God a favor, an obedience that glorifies the one who's doing the obeying, an obedience that redounds to the glory of the one obeying. Now, I think that the essence of this other kind of obedience is revealed in John the Baptist's rebuke of the Pharisees and the Sadducees when he said this, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bear fruit that befits repentance, and do not presume to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.'"
Helping to answer the questions of what is the gospel, that's On the Journey podcast. You want the rest of this episode or ones you might have missed, go to Podcast Central, EWTN.com/podcast, or just subscribe to On the Journey wherever you stream so you don't miss future episodes. I am Ace McKay. When Catholics Coast to Coast returns, we're going to hang out with the Messy family. And as we think about family board meetings, what about a 2.0 version? Because it starts with a simple but challenging idea, and then we put that thought into our jobs, into our family life, and then also how do we keep our family, work life, and kids' schedule under a stress-free environment? We'll find out more on those tips from the Messy family coming up next on Catholics Coast to Coast.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Taking a chance. Family. Like birds of a feather. Family. Kick off your shoes and dance.
Hey, we are Mike and Alicia Hernan, and we have 10 kids and grandkids too, and we are here for every parent.
Because we are on a mission to empower moms and dads to embrace their sacred calling. So join the conversation.
All in this together. Family. We're taking a chance.
Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. This is
a new day,
a new year, a new year, a brand new you. And we're going to be doing a re-release of what I think, at least as a topic, is one of the fundamental, if not I don't know, most important, but it's up there.
Something we talk about a lot about. Yeah, it's practical and important. Yeah. But before we get into that, one of the reasons we're doing the re-release is because when this podcast is just coming out, we're going to be getting back from Seek in Columbus. Yeah. So that was, I'm sure, will have been an amazing experience.
Seek is put on by Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. They do it around the country for years now, and they're projecting to have tens of thousands of people. Will be speaking at the one in Columbus, but they have them in 3 or 4 different locations. Yeah.
Down in Texas and out in Denver.
If you haven't seen it, we've done a ton on social media while we were at Seek. Right. So you want to check that out.
And I just feel like we're honored every time we're asked to speak to the young families there, because they really in many ways are our people, or they're people who are getting ready to be married, as young college students. And so it's just always a great honor to be asked. And I think Focus is an amazing organization. So we're happy to be part of them.
Yeah, honored and happy. and couldn't endorse their great work anymore. But we're also going to be packing up pretty quickly here and getting off to our getaway, our Catholic couples getaway
in the Bahamas.
Because
it's freezing here in Ohio.
I am a little chilly here. But we're excited to be going down there with so many great couples. And although this trip is sold out, if you are at all interested in the Catholic Couples Getaway, make sure you sign up at the site, CatholicCouplesGetaway.com.
For 2027, we'll be going back to the Bahamas in February.
Oh, you just announced it.
Oh, yeah. I thought we were supposed to do that. Anyway, we're going back to the Bahamas in February in 2027. So grab your spots now. But CatholicCouplesGetaway.com, and go there and get more information.
Okay, there we go. All right. And anything else?
Yes. And by the way, if you have not listened to our podcast with our kids.
Oh, yeah. The most recent podcast.
The one that before this one that came out in December. I have listened to it. We have gotten so many people tell us how impactful it was. So if you haven't listened to it, you need to go back and listen to it.
There's some frankness to it that I'm like, okay, hey, just so you know, we are not perfect, and our kids will be the first to tell you that, right?
Yeah, and I'm not embarrassed by anything they said. I think that they were very fair.
And I think that everybody does their family differently, but you can hear in those stories that there's just something really powerful about getting some of the most important things right. The relationships, the teaching of forgiveness, and the little traditions that we do that form a deep sense of togetherness and belonging with the kids, as well as an identity for who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so happy about that.
All right, let's
get into this podcast.
All right, so think about it this way. We spend a ton of time and money and energy. We invest it in getting better at our jobs, getting better at our work. And again, you know, we read books. For me, I listen to Audible or podcasts. I often have gone to conferences in the past. And then
we get consultants. We have people, coaches, to help us be better at work and professionally.
That's right. And then we'll, as a business, we'll even do strategic planning and have retreats and develop mission statements and vision statements and have these annual goals and all of that. And all that actually can be pretty good and can be very helpful.
Yeah.
But this is going to be a challenge for you if you've never done it before. Why don't we do the same level, or at least in a similar way, approach that for our family? Right. We have, as moms and dads, we have a job. I mean, it's more than just a job, but it's a job, right?
Right. And the impact that you have on your children, the lasting impact, not just on your children, but on your grandchildren.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, is way more for the average person, way more than the impact you're going to have at work. Unless you're curing cancer or you are running a small country, the impact that you are going to have on your family is way more than any professional impact that you're going to have.
And for most parents, we're either just winging it, making it up as we go along, or we're just so freaking busy. We haven't stopped to think, oh, how are we doing? Where are we going?
Right.
What's going on in our lives today? Because we're just all so busy. And for 2026, we want you to take on a real resolution that you're going to take some time to slow down and not be so frantic and so busy all the time.
And, I just want to say that going off of that last podcast that we did with our kids, you can hear the things that they talked about that were really impactful were things, and the kids even noticed, I know mom and dad did this intentionally.
Yeah.
And I will be honest with you, the reason that we did those things intentionally is because we stopped, we talked about it, we thought about it in our family board meeting. And now, look, it's affecting the way our kids are raising our grandkids.
And our kids, even our adult kids, don't not that we need a pat in the back, but there are a lot of things that parents do that kids never recognize, never notice. And some of the big stuff is, what environment did we choose to put them in? Whether it be in our home, whether it be in the schools, the way that we taught them and help them deal with the environment that they were dealt with, or the stuff that we do. It's all part of our family culture, right? And some of that becomes the air they breathe, that they don't even recognize that it's different. But that doesn't just happen. And that doesn't mean that you have to get stressed out and think about a million things, but we do need to be very intentional about some of the big stuff in our family life.
Right. So this episode that you're going to listen to now, it walks through the family board meeting and explains why the family board meeting matters, like what we've just been talking about, how to do one, and what you should actually talk about.
Right.
And the thing is that what is so, I think, genius about the family board meeting is that the way the structure is, it helps you avoid blaming each other, fighting with each other, or finding areas of disagreement. Instead, it focuses on areas of agreement.
Right.
And like the kid said, and like we would tell you too, you don't have to do it perfectly, but you do have to live your life on purpose. So we want you to jump into this and go. I think that we will put a link to the free family board meeting guide. That's a 4-page guide that you can download for nothing. We really believe strongly in this, so we just give it away for free. We also, I do want to say though, we do have the family board meeting course on demand, and that includes mentoring times that you can sign up. You do the family board meeting course. There's a link. You can schedule half an hour to talk to us and help us walk you through that family board meeting. You get an entire binder of information and worksheets and everything to do. So just put that plug in there if you'd like to kind of take it to the next level, or at the very least, listen to this podcast, get the free download, live intentionally.
Yeah. All right. So take a listen.
So we are here to talk about...
To pump you up. Sorry.
I think these people are too young for that. No, we are here to talk about the family board meeting. And this is a podcast that we did 3 years ago. And we talked about it then. If you'd like to go back and listen to it, you could.
No, don't bother.
But this is going to be a improved version of that, if you will.
2.0.
Yes, 2.0. That's why we're calling it 2.0, because we already did it once. But I think that this is going to give you some more insights, and because we've had more time ourselves to practice doing a family board meeting. So first of all, let me just talk about the importance of goals.
Right.
And that you as a family, you and your spouse are in charge of your little family corporation, if you will, if you look at it that way. That's why we call it a board meeting.
Right. So this is Hernan Inc., right? Type of
right.
thing.
It's the time when you can. So what's a board meeting? A board meeting would be a time when you go away together, or even if you should probably go away. We'll talk about that in a minute. But where you are very intentional about looking at where have you come from, where are you now, and where do you want to go? And so it's a comprehensive 50,000 foot, if you will, view of 30,000 foot view of your family and how are you doing overall. Not getting caught down in the details of your life, which we deal with every day, but really taking a minute to kind of step back and be like, okay, what's our big vision? Because if you don't have a vision, you really can't be moving in unity together.
Right. And I think about it from a professional standpoint, like how many people in our careers, go to, professional development conferences, go to, read books, take classes to get better at our job. We do all of these things where, companies go away for these big retreats and this, this conference over here and this planning days here, all of these things, which are very important, creating mission statements, having vision statements, having values, and all these things are so great for a company. But the reality is that our family is far more valuable. We are far more valuable as parents to our little institution, our family,
absolutely,
than any role at a corporation. Right? You can replace. So in your job, you can be replaced. I'm sorry to tell you that. In your job, you can be replaced, but as a parent, you cannot be replaced. There might be somebody who has similar or the same skill sets as you in giftedness and what have you in the workforce. But as a family, when do we take time to say, let's take a pause? Because I feel like there are so many things that are just simply pulling at us as families. And I feel like particularly early in our marriage, probably the first, I don't want to say 10 years, because we took some moments of pause, but I feel like we were winging it. We were shooting from the hip because we had a sea of kids around us, and they were pulling at our apron strings. I don't know, but I felt like there was just a busy, frantic life.
Right. And sometimes you can really kind of like miss the forest for the trees. Like we get so caught up in the details of our lives that we forget about our bigger vision and what do we want to do. And I think sometimes when people in our world feel very like I lost myself, when I became a parent, I changed, like in a bad way, meaning like I lost myself, I lost my ideals or whatever.
Right.
I think that part of that can very easily happen if you don't step back and say, who do I want to become? What do I want our family to look like? What do I want our marriage to look like? So that's what the family board meeting is about really looking at those things, because your family should be the place where you become everything that God wants you to become.
Right.
Your family shouldn't be holding you back. They should be the ones that are
unleashing who you are.
That are unleashing exactly even more of your giftedness. And that's not happening. It's not the problem with the family. It's really the problem with just how things are operating.
That's right.
And so we want to give you that opportunity and give you the tools. This is going to be some theory, some practical, about how to do this board meeting, because it's really, really so important to do that for your development, for your husband or wife's development, for your development as a couple, but ultimately for your development as a family.
Right. And we want to get to a place where you move from just simply putting out fires every day, to a place where you're looking above the forest, and you're looking out, where are we going? Like, kind of as you said in the very beginning, and the board meeting is just so important. And this is important no matter if you are not married. We have people who are not married who are listening to this podcast. We have
empty nesters,
those who have your children are grown and out of the house. You're not exempt from this, because this is actually really, really important for us as couples. Maybe you're engaged, maybe you're married, maybe you have a lot of kids, maybe you're looking and saying, I don't even know how I could do this. Don't worry, we've got some ideas for you. But whether you've just been married, whether you've been married for 25 years, whether you've been married for 40 plus years, wherever your kids are at, wherever you're at, this is a time for you to get away, to pause, and to really reflect and build a more intentional life. One of the reasons we've been doing a number of interviews recently, and people are like, well, why messy family? We love the name, but why messy? And I'm like, well, we're not trying to be messy. It's just that family life is messy.
It happens whether you try or not.
So it's just there. And if you've lived at all a moment in a family, then you know that. But our objective is that you become more intentional in your parenting, that we, recognizing our mess, recognizing the mess that we're in, we also say, hey, we want to aspire to something. And this is that moment where you can really step back in a very thoughtful way and plan out. Because, the Ben Franklin quote of failing to plan is planning for failure, and so we want to create on a certain level a plan of sorts for your family.
And I think sometimes we hesitate to make goals, or like New Year's resolutions or things like that. We hesitate to do that because we're like, well, I'm not going to do it anyway. Like, I'm not going to, or I just feel bad when I make plans because I don't always follow through, whatever. And, and in some ways, that's okay.
Yes.
Because the board meeting is not necessarily only about making goals. It's also about communication between you and your spouse and getting on the same page.
Yes.
So you can be unified in your vision for your family. Because it can very often happen where one spouse has one thought of like, oh, this is where I want to go. And another spouse is like, well, this is where I want to go. Maybe neither of them are bad, but you really need to have that time to communicate so you're on the same page and you have a united vision for your family. And also as far as like making the goals or not hitting the mark or not making it, that's okay, because the longer you're married and the longer you go through this process, your goals will become more refined.
Yeah.
You'll get better and better at making goals.
and it's actually really important. There's a concept in business, particularly entrepreneurship, where it's just fail fast, meaning embrace the failure. It's okay because you actually learn possibly even more from your failures than you do from your successes.
Right.
And as you said, it's about developing that deeper unity, but it's like you'll never hit a goal or a target if you don't actually say there is a goal or a target that you're trying to hit, right? I mean, it's just right?
If you don't make a goal, you'll never hit it.
That's right. You'll hit it every time. No goal, got it. You'll succeed. And so it's super important to take this away. And again, what it looks like for you and your family, your life. And again, I think I should be very clear. We call it the family board meeting, but we don't intend this to be with the children, although there might be ways to adapt some parts of this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Some parts of this to include children, maybe in the
after a follow-up.
But essentially, you are the executives. You are the president and CEO. You guys can fight over who has what title. Now, you're both co-founders of your family. The Messy Family Project, actually, just as a prelude, a year ago is when Alicia and I sat down and said, we're going to do this.
Isn't that hilarious? We were looking at our notes from our board meeting exactly a year ago.
Not that we hadn't talked about it before then, but that was the first time we really sat down and said,
made a plan.
Look like?
We wrote down a plan and everything. Isn't that crazy? Oh my gosh. It's so
anyway,
funny.
so we're the co-founders of the Messy Family Project. We're the co-founders of our family.
Of the Herndon family.
And so you guys are the founding presidents and CEO of your family. And you guys are worth it. You're better than, and I don't use the business terms to belittle families, because I actually believe that too many people do that and try to treat your family as a business. It's not. It's better than a business. It's got more life, more vitality, more staying power, and more influence in the world through your children. Absolutely. And a more irreplaceable role that you have. So
the reason, like we said, the reason you're doing this is so that you can be united
as a couple. And then it's really a time for you to evaluate how your children are doing, how you are doing as a couple, and also how you're doing as individuals. So you can support each other. And also, this should be a very positive thing. Yeah. We were talking to some of my brothers and sisters who do this family board meeting, and one little, I guess like one little pitfall that one of them shared with me is that they said that sometimes when they've done their family board meeting, they kind of use it to kind of say, oh, these are all the things we were doing wrong. Oh, we failed here. We failed there. And it shouldn't really be like that. It should really be. Or blaming, oh, you spent our money this way or did this the wrong way or whatever.
Yeah, but this should be a really positive thing and a time for dreaming and casting a vision and becoming more united. So to do that, yes, there is some looking at the past, but it's more looking at the future and good communication between the two of you.
And just to kind of put a finer point on this too, it's, we're in January and there's a lot of people who make New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
And
I bought a planner today.
That's right. and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's great. And if you're into New Year's resolutions, great, go for it. But right now, we're in mid-January, almost, I'll get into the second half. There are people fail in their resolutions more so than they succeed. And I'm not trying to set anybody up. Mm-hmm. Great. If it works for you, awesome. We're not talking about simply a New Year's resolution.
Exactly.
We're actually talking about kind of looking at the big picture of your parenting, your family, your marriage, all of that in a very intentional way. So you can really set out some markers. And we look back. And again, like we said before, we don't always succeed, but the process, as well as some of the reality of what we were able to accomplish through this, is light years ahead of what we could have done. And I've just seen it over the number of years now that we've been doing this. It's so fruitful. I can't wait because we're also doing this in advance of our board meeting for this year. So
yes, we have that.
We're slightly behind, but it's never too late. So if you're listening to this in February or March or a year from now, it's never too late.
A year from now, it'll be January again.
Right. Then you're actually ahead of time. Yeah. So, but it doesn't matter when you do it is the point.
Right.
I guess. There you go. All right. So how do we do this? Right.
Right. So let's get down to the nitty gritty.
All right. So we have tried to make this simple for you because we think that your life is way too busy. And that's why we're in this ministry, to try to help serve you.
Give you tools.
And one of the tools that we have created for you is a preparation and an outline for how to do your own family board meeting.
Like a worksheet.
A worksheet for you. And
several worksheets.
It's not, eventually we'll probably develop this into a full ebook. If people want it, let us know. And we've had some people ask about maybe even doing this in other ways, but we've got a free download for you on our website, messyfamilyproject.org, and you'll see the sign up to get that download. That'll help walk you through this. But let's talk through what this looks like right now.
Right. And you'll find the download very helpful for sure.
And I'll mark this place here, maybe in the notes where we're at right now. So that we're at like 18, just about 19 minutes, meaning if you want to look at the worksheet, it might actually make sense if you're looking at the download and listen to the podcast again, or for your spouse, if they don't want to hear all the awesome reasons of why to do this. But actually they should.
They should. You should have them listen.
Forget it. I'm not linking to anything, but I'll link to the download where you can get it on our site.
Okay. So the first thing you need to do is you need to set aside a time and a place to meet. Okay, you got to start with the logistics, right? Where are you going to do this?
Right.
Ideally, you would go away.
Right.
We have talked in other podcasts about the great value that we see in spouses having a lone special time together, just to be together, to remind each other, why did we get married again?
Yeah. Who are you?
All of that. Yes, I remember you.
And remind that you're first a spouse before you're a parent.
Exactly. And so ideally, you would go away like on a Friday and have a Friday evening and then an all-day Saturday and then even into Sunday, and to have some wrap-up time and fun time together. So those 3 days. Obviously, that is not going. We have not done that every year.
Right. That's our goal. That's our objective, is to do that every year.
Right.
In a weekend format.
You all will be married a long time, just like us. So some years are going to be that. Some years are going to be different. Right. So another option. Another thing you can do is, if you have, a lot of little kids or whatever, you don't have the funds to go away, well, then go out, like after the kids go to sleep on a Friday night, start it on that Friday night, and then get a babysitter all day Saturday, and then just leave early in the morning, even leave before the kids wake up. And then go out someplace all day, go to a coffee shop, go to wherever, and then go until the evening,
right,
and then come home. So you don't have to. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this. I don't want to hear any excuses from you people.
That's right. Well, and it is tough, especially if you have a lot of little kids. How are you going to do it? How are you going to juggle babysitting? Maybe a couple of, like, we were in an event in Connecticut where someone was just having trouble going out on a date. And the families said, "Oh, I'll watch your kids, and hey, could you watch ours, and we'll go out." Maybe there's some couples that you can get together with, and you can, help babysit, or you can spread out your kids. We still do this. We farm out different kids to different places, so it's not a burden on anybody.
And so then maybe get a babysitter for the two youngest,
right?
For the whole day, or something along those lines.
But it might be, we had one listener who chose a place that had a lot of specific meaning to his wife, and kind of childhood experience and so forth. And so, but it's important to, again, it may not always be able to do this, but the ideal is really that you get out of your normal life, that you're both in a place where you're not going to have the same phones, TV, the same habits, the same, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go check this computer. You're away together, and that your time is focused. And there are so many positive reasons. But the last one that we went on, it was so good that it was just the two of us away, because we got into a fight right away. And
I know this shocks all of you, but we do get into fights.
Yeah. But the reason why it was good is that
we were in public, so there was no screaming or anything.
That's right. It was very, very controlled, very modest.
We're in a restaurant.
But if I had... I could put on a veneer and just kind of go through the motions, but because we were alone for that whole weekend, and we were at a hotel and we were, away, we had to deal with this, and it was good.
Yeah.
And it made the board meeting actually richer, because we struggled through an issue, which helped expose some other things, which then, drove us in. Anyway, I'm not saying you're going to get into a fight.
I hope you don't get into a fight.
That's right. That's not the plan, baby.
But if you do, it's not a bad thing.
Right. But because you're together. The whole point is that you're together.
Right. And I think sometimes, like, when you have the kids all the way around, we all do this, right? Like, something comes up and you just kind of sweep it under the rug. You're like, I don't have time to deal with this right now.
That's right.
But when you're alone together, sometimes it's good to, not that this is like a marriage retreat we're sending you on. But the point is that when you go away, it helps you to focus on each other, to bring up underlying issues, and then so you can start going towards a unified vision,
right,
which kind of brings very quickly to the next point, which is to affirm each other. And that is part of the great thing about how you're going to start this off. So if you do get into a fight, move quickly to the affirm each other.
Or better, start with the affirm each other. And again, in the worksheet we go through.
Skip the fight.
On the worksheet, we actually have specific questions, and we think you should prepare this a little bit in advance. And it can be right before, but thinking very specifically about how to affirm, acknowledge, respect, show love for your spouse.
Very concretely, over the past year,
I've seen this growth. I've seen this character. I've seen this.
I love it when you do this. I've seen how you have changed and how you have you serve me in these areas. Right. Like, be very concrete. And really, that Friday night time should be mostly you affirming each other, because really, to get those creative juices flowing and to move as towards a united vision, you need to start with the two of you being in a strong, good place.
Right. A family board meeting, well, it's a chance to pause, breathe, and get back on the same page. It's great stuff from the Messy family. You want the rest of this show? Well, check it out at Podcast Central. Go to EWTN.com/podcast or find the Messy family wherever you like to stream. That way, anything you might have missed, you can always go back and catch up at your leisure. I'm Ace McKay. Going to bow out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Remember to let God define who you are, and I'll see you again with Catholics Coast to Coast.